Good morning, and what a pleasure it is to be here this morning as the first keynote speaker addressing you. It's my pleasure to be involved in the second of the World Nursing Conferences. Last year was a great success, and I'm sure by looking at the, having an opportunity to look at the papers that were received for this year, again, this I'm sure is going to be a fantastic conference. As Ellie said, my name is Associate Professor Kewley. I'm from the University of Newcastle in New South Wales, Australia. It's unfortunate having to use this microphone, but the room might be a bit too big to project without it, because I always feel like I'm going to end up doing some karaoke or calling bingo or something like that, and that wouldn't be very pleasant. Anyway, this morning, let's get into first presentation. So what I'd really like to do is to just talk this morning about interprofessional training and collaborative practice. Why is it so difficult? The odyssey continues. Now, you might not think it is difficult, but I'm certainly, from my experience, trying to establish meaningful interprofessional education is incredibly difficult. Some of the work I'm going to put up this morning really is coming out of some foundational work that we're doing within my university, within the Faculty of Health and Medicine at the University of Newcastle. And it really comes out of a major literature search which we have just recently completed. And so really, the other thing also about what I want to present this morning, this will be perhaps a little controversial. I'm hoping it will get us actually discussing this, and certainly please feel free to challenge me on anything that I say this morning. I expect to be challenged, because this is purely me putting up my interpretation from the literature of where we're up to internationally from an IPE point of view. So what I want to do is to really look at the enigma of interprofessional education, interprofessional learning. Where are the footprints? After doing a major systemic review, looking through all of the literature, it's certainly evident within academia that we're really big on writing in this area. There's no doubt about that. There's some fantastic literature out there. But where's the footprints on the ground that indicate we're actually putting it into practice? We work within teams, but we have a tendency to train within what I would class as silos, that is individual disciplines. If I look at what's happening around the world, the best I can describe is that IPE or IPL is actually being applied piecemeal. It's on the margins of mainstream curriculum. But before you challenge and say, but we're already doing it, there's no doubt it's happening. There's good evidence of it happening in the US. There's good evidence of it happening in the UK. There's some fantastic work happening in Canada. And there's some beginning work happening in Australia and New Zealand. But it is still piecemeal, and it seems to be a struggle. So why is that? So what I want to do today is to basically deconstruct IPE. I'm going to call upon Basil Bernstein, a sociologist, his work in how he looks at these sort of systems. And also will be coming from what is very much a systems theory, and also I think some of this difficulty in getting good IPE, getting our different disciplines training together and learning together. I think what I need to do is to call upon also organizational theory, because in there I think lies one of the problems. So what I want to look at is the structure of knowledge and the impervious professions, our professions. So it's really the structure of knowledge that I am going to make as my main thesis, my main argument this morning, that it's how we structure knowledge, our professional knowledge, that is the problem to preventing what should be the obvious thing, and that is having excellent interprofessional education, working within teams. I think it would be true to say that the structure of knowledge creates the formation of our professional identities. It's our knowledge base that makes us the professionals who we are today. And that's important. Specialized knowledge created within a discipline, I would argue, though, creates, and I want to use this word, inwardness, and I'll keep coming back to it. I would argue that the specialist knowledge created within disciplines creates an inwardness, an inner dedication. And that's taken from Bernstein's work, and I would agree with that. This structure of knowledge or inwardness creates a privileged status. That's doctor, nurse, lawyer, whatever it might be. And it gives legitimacy to the claim of expert based on exclusive possession of specialized knowledge. So it really gives us identity. That's good. That's what we do want. But inwardness and the privileged status creates, I would argue, and you might argue differently, an impervious boundary or boundaries around our disciplines that are created to protect our cherished professional identity, who we are as a nurse, as a doctor, as a psychologist. It's our cherished professional identity. The specialized knowledge, plus this inwardness that I would argue, plus the professional identity, being the expert that we are as a nurse, aggregates over generations. And it strengthens the boundaries that creates inclusion and exclusion criteria. We let certain people in based on who they are, what their qualification is, what their discipline is. We exclude others who might have something to offer based on their identity, their profession. So I would argue that the specialized knowledge and this inwardness and professional identity, being the expert, aggregates and creates boundaries. And in health, I would further argue, we magnify this inwardness about ourselves and our inner dedication, creating even further complexity and exclusion by creating subspecialties. And each of those subspecialties then has further boundaries and further inclusion and exclusion criteria. So in defense of professional fidelity, because we want to have professional fidelity, we want to protect our profession. But we have a tendency to become fiercely partisan in the defense of nursing or medicine. And I would argue, and again, please challenge me, that this creates a pseudo-egalitarian state, creating a range of inner and outer relationships. So what it actually has a tendency to do, it has a tendency to make it look like we work in teams and we work together. But in fact, I would say to you, that is not so. And obviously, this creates a range of inner and outer relationships. So if we put specialization of knowledge plus inwardness and the status of expert together, what we create is a sacred identity. Or could I be really controversial and say what we create is professional narcissism, where we fight to the death to protect our identity. And I believe as nurses, doctors, and the other health professions, we do have this sacred identity. And that is good. That is good from the point of view of us really wanting to make sure that our profession is strong, is evidence-based, and provides evidence-based care. But I think also this whole defense of professional fidelity also is another one of the things that causes the block to good IPE and interprofessional learning. Just calling on Bernstein's work again, he socially constructed professional knowledge into professional knowledge structures, which he calls singulars, regional, and generics. So we'll just have a look to see what Bernstein means by this. Okay, so when we talk about socially constructed professional knowledge structures, singulars, what does this mean? Okay, this is the classic. These are the characteristics. Unique name with a specialized, discrete discourse, with its own intellectual field of text, practice rules of entry, examinations, and licenses to practice. Very, very important. The singulars, another characteristic they are exemplified by pure academic disciplines with strongly bounded character, which creates the possibility of purity of identity, or this sacredness that I'm talking about, or otherness. You're either in or you're out. E.g., medicine, nursing, law, psychology. There's plenty of the professions we could actually put into the singulars that have these type of characteristics. But what I'm arguing this morning is that perhaps we hold too strongly to this within singulars, within the socially constructed network of singulars, from the point of the strong perceived intrinsic value of their specific knowledge domain results in this inwardness. We hold so strongly to these characteristics that we see belong to our profession that the intrinsic value of the specific knowledge that says I'm a nurse, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, creates this domain, resulting in inwardness, looking, not outwardness, and not openness. Ascetically being basically somebody who dedicates themselves to a pursuit of to contemplate ideas, ascetically socialized into a subject and subject loyalty, creating a linchpin of identity. So it's the knowledge that we dedicate ourselves to that creates the linchpin of our identity as a profession. But do we hold to that too strongly? Just looking a little bit further at some of the characteristics, according to Bernstein and other sociologists, around the concept of singulars as a professional knowledge structure. Singulars, the professions that come into here, are largely define the boundaries of their knowledge base, and in most cases institutionalized in the form of a curriculum taught by a professional school. Okay, we all belong to professional schools. But constrained to develop and implement a code of ethics through which individual professions can be held accountable. Nobody would argue against that. Other characteristics of singulars, I would suggest though, are singulars from the point of view of the knowledge base of a profession, professionally are insulated from the pressure of unrestricted free market competition. Also insulated professional knowledge and values from external interference or professional contamination. Our boundaries are so strong we protect against that. That's good. This creates exceptionally strong external boundaries around each corpus of knowledge. This is where the problem lies. The boundaries are so strong that we protect boundaries around all of the knowledge that we have and say, no, this belongs to nursing, this belongs to medicine, this belongs to psychology. So if we just move on to have a look at what are the other socially constructed professional knowledge structures according to Bernstein and other sociologists, and we look at the concept of regional, what does this mean? Regional knowledge structures are demand-led. They do respond to the market. They are more flexible. In the majority, they are unrestricted by license, legislation, or professional practice or rules of entry. Very often, we can see them as being modular in their design, exhibiting an organizational ability, agility, and ability to be able to respond to the demands of the market and the market trends. So they have a far greater flexibility. It's argued that the modular nature of regionals, that's regional structures that have professional knowledge structures that are constructed as regionals, it's argued that modular nature of the regionals promotes a loss of academic autonomy and authority. But does it? If we look at the third socially constructed professional knowledge structures according to Bernstein and others, we can see the generics. And the one example I put up here, which everybody would be familiar with, that would probably fit into this today, are MOOCs, the massive online open courses. Generic, unlike the singulars and the regions, the generic knowledge structures generally have the following characteristics. I have said here they sit outside of the formal curriculum. Many are directed at extra educational experiences. Originally sat within further education and but not universities, but that's not so for the MOOCs obviously. The MOOCs do sit within, are being led by the university sectors. And they are linked explicitly to perceived demands from the market. And they are structurally flexible. They're there and available for everyone. So what I'd like to do is just really look at, for a few minutes, the DNA of professional fidelity. Okay, here we have, what I'm trying to depict here is, this could be any profession. Let's say it's nursing, or we say it's medicine. So what I'm arguing this morning and putting forward to you as my thesis is that socially constructed professional knowledge structures of singulars, this is what we look like. We have impermeable professional membranes. We let certain people through that membrane and others not. We let certain knowledge through the membrane and certain knowledge is excluded. This is what creates the inwardness that I'm arguing this morning and the privileged status and the legitimacy of expertise, of expert. And attached to that, we have an inclusion and exclusion criteria. And what I put to you this morning is, this maintains our sacred identity. And you might say, that is okay. And it is important because as a profession, we have got to have, to a degree, boundaries in the professionalism around us, and we don't want to lose the identity of nurse. But what does this do? What does this DNA of professional fidelity do today to our learning, and how does it fit with industry? We are training people to work within teams, and a team is more than just working as a nurse or working as a doctor. So, knowledge relationship and the professional inwardness. Here we've got a swarm, it could be said, of singular professional knowledge structures. Health profession A could be medicine. Health profession B could be nursing. Health profession C could be perhaps psychology. I'm not too sure, and on it goes, but I think you'll probably understand where I'm coming from. So on one hand, we would say that's a team. And I would argue with you that's a loosely coupled team. Because each section, each group within that team have got inclusion and exclusion criteria. And from that diagram would suggest still have impervious boundaries that do not allow for the freedom of knowledge to move comfortably across those different groups. So that could actually be a team working in a hospital. But is that a team? Or that could be your faculty of health and medicine, where your students are actually training. So the basis of my argument today is, from spending a considerable amount of time looking at all the literature out there around looking at interprofessional education and interprofessional learning, notwithstanding, I think we're doing some excellent IPE and IPL. And I've highlighted in some of the countries where I think it's working very strongly and it's really starting to develop. But I would say that if you look at the amount of literature that's out there coming out of the academic world, this world, We're doing a lot of talking, but there's not much walking. There's a lot of people writing and getting their publications up on this subject, but very few of those people are actually leading it on the ground and making it real. That's what the literature would suggest. So if we look at this here, what I've tried to depict here is recontextualizing professional fidelity of singular knowledge structures. So moving us from not just the pure singular structure, but to a more hybrid. If we can move to a more hybrid, is what I'm arguing, which allows our membrane of our profession to be a little bit more permeable, then we will really move into interprofessional education. We will really move then into true team performance. So what we have here again is we've got the same 4 student groups, health teams in a hospital, whatever you want to call it. These still maintain the core for their professional fidelity. But recontextualizing knowledge, but we need to recontextualize the knowledge that is applicable to all and that is not owned by just any one group, so that we can allow to have that knowledge being transmitted and people working closer together. I'm sure you'd agree that if that was the curriculum looked to some degree like that, we would be strengthening our interprofessional education. I'm sure if our teams within our hospitals really looked like this, and they didn't look like those pseudo-egalitarian that looks like everybody's equal and working together, if they looked like this, we would have far better patient outcomes. We'd have far better patient flow, where patients aren't being slowed up in their movement because of boundaries between different professions. So after really looking at all of the literature, in starting to look at how my faculty of medicine, of health and medicine at the University of Newcastle in Australia, how we can really move ourselves out of what is really just, I would argue, silo-based training of professions. There's several things that we've looked at now that we plan to move forward on. I don't know whether it's particularly clear on these diagrams here. I think it's interesting that we actually train our nurses and doctors over many years of studying within their curricula. And then at the end of it, we graduate and then we say, now go out and be a team. But when do we really, really introduce the whole concept of team? And shouldn't that whole concept of team be right from the very start and not something when somebody graduates? So the framework which we're working on in my university, the consensus framework for the development of interprofessional education, which in Australia we've got one of the in Newcastle from an Australian perspective, and there'll be, I'm sure, Australians here in the audience this morning. From our situation, we've got one of the most integrated faculties of health and medicine with just about every discipline you can imagine at the University of Newcastle. And we've also got recognized worldwide after Harvard from the point of view of problem-based education, which has been in our medicine curriculum for a long time. So we've always had a reasonably forward-thinking way of looking at our education. But we are still very much tied in our silos. We don't come together hardly at all. So what this is basically looking at is, how can we break down that professional, that DNA, professional fidelity that actually stops us sharing more of the knowledge? How can we reduce the inwardness thinking of our students so that when they come out at the end of their curriculum, they're not just coming out as an expert nurse or doctor, they're coming out as an expert health professional who absolutely knows how to work in a team. So there's 3 levels that we're looking at within our interprofessional competency framework. Level 1 is exposure. So this is really looking at some of the shared stuff we can come together, and it's not owned by any one discipline. So things like the determinants of health, values and ethics, how health systems work, role clarification. When do we do role clarification? We teach role clarification usually within silos, within disciplines. The second level then looks at immersion. As the students, medicine, nursing, are progressing, the second level is immersion. This is really looking at how they start to then come together around team functioning, collaborative care, leadership of health systems, interprofessional work, conflict resolution in teams. So building this in and getting them to work more and more together, all the way through the curriculum. And then when we look at level 3, which is very much integration, this should be our capstone experience. And this is really where we work before they graduate, or we will be working with them before they graduate, so that they're actually going out and having great experiences as student teams, not as nursing teams, not as medical teams, but as true health teams of students in partnership with our industry partners. So this slide here basically just tries to, and whether you can read it or not, I'm not really too sure. It really just tries to show you some of the things that we're building into our capability framework around our curriculum to break down this inwardness and this sacredness, so that we get our students really, really working together. This just covers some of the curriculum aspects that we'll be covering at each of the different levels. Level 1, exposure. Level 2, immersion. Level 3, integration, as they actually progress through their time at university. So hopefully by the time these students are coming out, not only are they experts and have that sacred identity of a nurse, a doctor, or whatever, because this is not about getting rid of that. What they do have, though, is really a greater identity as an integrated health professional who has been trained into working within a team and sharing knowledge right from the very start. So as you can see there, again, down social, the first bit, the first level exposure is really just exposing them to each other, and it's around the things which are pretty safe, which they're the basics that everybody needs to be learning, regardless of whether they're a nurse, a doctor, any other health professional, physio, or whatever. The second is then really going into looking at the interdisciplinary relationships and how we work together. And then the third, as I say, is going into the capstone experience of collaborative learning and practice, so that really they are work ready. Can we really say our students are work ready at this point in time? As universities, as academics, we will say yes. We can tick them off. They've passed every exam. They've reached each of the qualifications. They've reached the qualifications that are necessary. But I can tell you from my experience, and I've only just recently in the last couple of years come out of actual health executive leadership. Doesn't matter where you go, the students are not work ready. I would argue they are not work ready, they are not team ready. And I would argue one of the reasons for that is because of the basis of the curriculum that we put our students through at this point in time, and that is not preparing them, and that we've got to move beyond inwardness to really looking what is true interprofessional education. So many people in the room here probably will be reading the literature. Many people here in the room might be writing the literature on interprofessional education. People will be aware that there is good IPE and IPL happening in certain universities and across the world. As I say, UK, Canada is coming really, really strong. A little bit in Australia, New Zealand. But really, go out and try and find the footprints and move beyond the academia of just actually writing about it for publications and finding it in situ, in practice. There isn't a lot happening at this stage, and I think that needs to change. Nearly finished. I just want to put this up because if you have a look at this, and I don't have that slide over there myself, this is what it's really all about. the new work order, or the morphological organization, organizations are changing today. The shape of them, and this includes health systems. The old bureaucracy of the rigid structure based on control, impervious, slow to respond to the environmental changes, traditional roles of sacred identities, all of that is what's interfering with the health system today. All of that is what's causing boundaries and poor outcomes for patients, that's causing the slowing up of patient flow, certainly in the Western world, if you look at how patients move through emergency departments. It's because it's locked in this bureaucracy. It's because it's locked within the boundary systems that the professions set up. The new organizational structures that are coming through are morphologically strong, as we see here. Flexible structures, autonomy within boundaries, permeable membranes, organizational agility, and professional identity slightly blurred while still maintaining the sacred identity of the profession. And I just want to put that up as just as a bit of an advert. In March 29th to April the 1st, 2015, we have the first Asian Medical Education Association meeting outside of Asia happening in Newcastle through my university, New Directions in Patient-Centered Medical Education. Please, we'd love to see you there in Newcastle. Thank you very much.